We're back. Kind of happy new year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
How was your
I
Christmas?
It was good. It was good. It was I had a white Christmas and a lot of really slow time with the family. It was actually pretty glorious. Like boring, lazy, everything I could have hoped. How about you?
Yeah, it was good. Obviously, back to the UK, saw a lot of friends and family, packed a lot into 2 weeks. So it was nice to switch the brain off for a couple of weeks, which was great. So kind of getting back into the swing of things now. And thank you, listeners, for your patience. I know it's been a little bit of a wait since our last episode. We did say in the Christmas special that we're looking at maybe doing a bit of a new schedule for this show, just because obviously I've got a lot of commitments with Posh and other things going on. So um, we've got a new schedule to announce. I am going to be appearing once a month with Connor and usually a guest. And Connor, you're taking up some solo hosting episodes. So tell us a little bit about that.
Big shoes to fill. Hopefully, I won't just derail this whole operation. But yeah, I'm excited that Nick's given me a little reign to do some solo episodes, and I actually recorded the first one a few days ago, and I think we're off to a rockin' start. So I can't wait to air it.
Right, and I'm looking forward to listening. So yeah, the new schedule, what we're looking at doing is one a month with myself, Connor, and another guest, and then 2 weeks later it'll be a Connor solo hosted episode with a guest of Connor's choice. So it'll be 2 episodes a month from now on. That's the schedule that we're looking to hit. Forgive us if there may be a couple of teething issues as we work our way into that new schedule, but that's what we're shooting for. And yeah, as I've said a few times before, I think Connor, you've elevated the show, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you can do with those solo episodes. So this will be going out obviously today, and then Connor's episode with who's it with in a couple of weeks.
It's with Ken Barber of Wild Haven, Sonoma, and Wild Haven, Yosemite.
Awesome. So we will all look forward to listening to that. Today, I think we've got a great guest to kick things off, or great guests, plural, to kick things off for the new year. One of them is a returning guest. It's Andrew Murphy, I don't think you're on the episode where you kind of, it was just me.
It was just you, yeah.
Yeah. He's the kind of founder, owner of Sojourner Glamping, who I spoke to probably 18 months ago now, coming up to 2 years. Who we dove really deep into their kind of permitting process, because they got permitted for 144 units, and they had, as you would probably expect, some horror stories from that, but a whole lot of learnings. And that was a great episode, and I do recommend people go back and listen to that. We'll put the link in the description. And that's still going on. We're going to catch up with Andy about Sojourner. But today's focus really is on something that we've talked a little bit about in the past in a few different episodes, but not really gone too deep into it. And that's the kind of African luxury safari glamping experience, which Andy is an expert on, but so is his fellow guest today, who he's brought in with us. And it's Michel Girardin, who is a ops director, consultant, GM, many hats in that African safari space. And between those two, they've got some fantastic insights into how that industry works, and why it's important, and why what maybe US and Canadian operators can learn from that industry, because there is a lot. So I'm super excited about today's episode. Connor, I know you are too as well.
Yeah, definitely. I had a chance to spend 4 months in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa, seeing a lot of, staying at a lot of these game parks, or like out on the Serengeti or Ngorongoro Crater, and it's really the birthplace of glamping and the transient luxury experience, like out in the bush. And wow, what an experience it is, to be able to go to bed listening to lions and wake up and have all types of big game and animals, short walk or drive away. And it is interesting that this trend, started there before it started in the U.S. So I think it's a fun topic. It's an interesting topic, and could have some insights as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole North American industry owes a lot to it. Yeah, even if it's just because Sarah Dusick under Canvas was so inspired by her experience over there, and she took a lot from that experience into the early under Canvas locations. So for that alone, we owe a lot. But also, the industry goes back a long way, long before the term glamping was ever used. So I'm super excited to catch up with Andy and to speak to Michelle, see how it all works behind the scenes in those kind of wildlife operations. So without further ado, we're back, and let's meet Andy and Michelle. Okay, Andy, welcome back to the show. What's been going on in your life since we last spoke?
Man, I mean, I feel like I've lived multiple lifetimes since the last time we spoke. But so we connected end of 2023. I think I actually listened to the old podcast just to remember. We had just expanded our SUP from 85 acres to 200. We had just gotten the lawsuit that was against us that was tossed. It was tossed and thrown out by a judge. What's happened with that lawsuit since then is Virginia's only had an appeals court for about a year and a half, so they went and appealed our case as well. And we've also sought to dismiss that. We're fairly certain that's going to go away, but that's still out there. I think the main shift is, we were planning on opening a 10-unit pilot in 2024 and then opening a full property in 2025. And I think, as I've heard on many of your episodes, the reality of the capital raise steps right in the way. And even though I've been in those shoes before, there's nothing ever easy or fast about raising money for a novel real estate venture. And I always seem to find myself in the way of trying to do something that no one has ever done before. So why not just do glamping? Let's do the biggest glamping unit that's been done. And we got a lot of investor feedback that 10-unit pilot, I call it the Goldilocks problem. So the 10-unit pilot we were working on was too small. And for a lot of people, 144 units was too big to take off. So one of the things we have done in the last year was we brought in a gentleman named Sean O'Shea. And I'll also mention we're working with Connor on a new feasibility study. And Sean has a background in raising money for what he calls off-the-fairway real estate ventures. So he dated Dionis and I for about a year before he decided to sign on. He decided he likes our strategy, and he's been able to get us to some pretty high-level players in the real estate capital markets. And the main feedback was they wanted to see a project that could stand on its own. So they didn't want a project like 10 units that you have to then build more to get to the full return. And so we pivoted at the end of 2024 to creating this bigger project. So that's where we are. We're looking to try and get a site plan in shape by say May, June, and then kind of be in a position for a construction loan by the end of the summer. But those are all, you know how timelines works.
Yeah, and one thing that is just a constant theme with every operator that I talk to and Connor talks to, whether it's on the show or off mic, is I don't think there's ever a straightforward journey. It never goes as you expect. You have to pivot all the time. You face rejection all the time, and so that is no surprise whatsoever. But as is the case with all those guys and girls, is they just keep putting one foot in front of the other. That's what you're doing, and I'm excited to see that site open. And I know it would be a huge success because of how you think about the business.
The way I look at it is, so Zaina took me from writing the business plan to actually closing the capital 6.5 years. I'm not quite 5 years into the Sojourner journey, so I feel like I still have a little runway before.
Yeah, and you mentioned Zaina there. That's how we're going to kick things off today. Most of the focus is going to be on a site that Michel was, pivotal to, Sabi Sabi in South Africa. But you wanted to kick things off with talking about Zaina, which was a property that you have been and are involved with in Ghana. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that property, that project, and why it's relevant to what we're talking about today?
Sure. I'll give you the through line. And just for background for other folks is, I was listening to you guys from time to time, and a lot of times people refer to kind of the start of the U.S. glamping industry as under canvas, or kind of when resort and pause up, or something like that. And I was always reflecting that there's kind of a whole industry in the global safari industry that's been doing really well done, high-end experiential outdoor stays for decades. And, that's where I had gotten my start. So on one side, I'm a guy trying to start a new brand in the U.S., but I've also am 10 years into a 25-room tented lodge, which anywhere outside the U.S. Would be a safari lodge. They don't really call it glamping. So quick through line from Ghana to Sojourner was I finished undergrad and from Georgetown and was working in change management for a consulting company. And after 2 years realized that was terrible. And I did a same thing and I joined the Peace Corps. I walked away from a perfectly good paying job, not for the last time, and ended up in northern Ghana. And my job description was actually pretty straightforward. It was kind of crazy. It was the coolest job I ever had. It was like, hey, Andy, you were a consultant. We're sending you to northeast Ghana. You're going to be closer to Burkina and Togo. There's some elephants coming out of Burkina Faso and raiding farms, so we want you to work with the farmers on that. Job description, point one. Point two is we think there's potential for tourism, so you're going to have to go and explore. And I literally had a budget to build a wooden canoe to go down the White and Red Volta rivers and see if there was potential for tourism. And they said, yeah, there's also this women's farming association. Maybe you can help them make more money. The guy who ran that nonprofit that I was partnered with, named John Mason, he became my partner in Zaina. He had started his conservation group at the behest of Jane Goodall back in the mid-90s. And at the time, he was just putting Peace Corps volunteers from the U.S. in communities who had been tourists before to help move ecotourism along in that country. So I did that for 3 years, had a blast. I ended up being in Ghana 6 years. I ended up helping them get money from the U.S. government, USAID, to work on ecotourism all over the country. So I got to work with like a community who believed their ancestors came back as crocodiles. And you can actually take pictures next to the crocodiles, all kinds of, we helped set up a hippo sanctuary in northwest Ghana. And what I found during that time is, you know, the through line to Sojourn is that if you want tourism to be an economic generation for communities, you have to find a way to attract the right clients. In order to do that, you have to find a way to put in high-end accommodation. So most of these destinations weren't going to be anything other than backpacker destinations. And so we started running around Ghana saying, hey, we want to build this lodge in one of these communities. And it was like Field of Dreams. It's like, that sounds awesome, Andy, said the tour operators. When you build it, we'll bring our people, but we're not going to give you any money to do this. So I left Ghana in 2004 to go to business school, and what shifted was, while I was away, Ghana was one of the few countries in Africa that did not have concessions inside national parks. And that's something we don't have in the US. So most safari lodges in Africa are inside the middle of national parks and concessions. So my partner John had worked with the government on those concessions. We bid on one and got it. And then I wrote the business plan for Zana as an emerging markets real estate paper for a real estate class in business school. Was again naive about how long it would take to raise money. So we thought it would be 6 months. It turned out to be 6.5 years. But we were able to close the capital somewhere around 2013. I moved back to Ghana in 2014, and then by end of 2015 we opened up. We're inside Ghana's largest national park, which is Mole National Park. So for U.S. guests, the only two parks in the U.S. that are in the continental U.S. that are bigger than Mole National Park would be Yellowstone and the Everglades. It's about 5,400 square kilometers. We're about 4 kilometers into the entrance of the park, and we're on a bluff overlooking these waterfalls where elephants swim. And there are no fences, so you can wake up one day and have an elephant right outside your property, your room. One of the cool things is we actually moved the poaching boundary back into the park, and so the wildlife population since we created Zana have exploded. So we had Panthera in the park a couple years ago, which is a global cat NGO. And they were describing Zana as one of the best examples of lodge-based conservation they'd ever seen. So buffalo come to the waterholes now. I'll tell you the buffalo story with Michel later. There are leopards, which is both kind of a good thing and a bad thing when you have guests walking around. But it's doing right. It's the highest rated property in Ghana on TripAdvisor. It's where I learned social media following. And we really kind of changed the game for high-end accommodation in northern Ghana. So that's the backdrop. And then if you want, I can add in how Michel features into that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So one of so Ghana, there was no safari lodges in West Africa. And so I'm running around. I was the crazy white American kid running around business school talking about a lodge in Ghana. And people looked at me like I was nuts. So one of the ways I learned the safari industry is I signed up to run all the Africa Business Club trips to Africa in 2006. So I took 32 MBA students to South Africa that February. And incidentally, the unofficial start of Sojourner was there because I got Dionys and his wife to join me on that trip. That's kind of really where we say that's where Sojourner started. And I took another 32 MBA students to Tanzania that May. That's where I figured out what safari lodge cars we're going to use. But the tour operator who helped me run that trip, you guys are going to find I'm a collector of people. I've collected Michel. You guys don't know it yet, but you're part of my group as well. I collect people as I go. So the guy who helped me set up those trips became a friend. I sold him on the lodge in Ghana. He became an investor and was helping us out. He's on my board to this day. And he sends Americans on kind of bespoke trips to South Africa and East Africa. So he introduced me to a couple of people, including Michel. And we ended up hiring Michel to train all of our safari guides. Because you imagine, there were no private lodges, safari lodges in Ghana. And so we wanted to kind of bring the vibe from high-end safari lodge guide training from South Africa to Ghana. And Michel did that for us in 2015, and he's still kind of part of our family to this day. I even once tried to get him as the general manager of Zana, but there was some board politics that prevented that. But the cool thing that we're going to talk about today is I got to do this fam trip to South Africa in early 2014, and I got to visit a couple safari lodges that have done really, really well in South Africa. One was Tula Tula, which was the home of this guy called the Elephant Whisperer, which is an entirely different story. And then Sabi Sabi, where Michel had been the director of operations, and really opened my eyes to just what that whole, I call it kind of a choreographed play experience is in a really well done safari lodge.
Well, I think we'll probably have to have a third episode to hear about the Elephant Whisperer, Andy. But now is probably about the right time to bring Michel in. Michel, even just looking at your LinkedIn, you've got an awesome background in a cool part of the world. So could you just tell us a little bit about you and your experience in hospitality, and particularly African kind of safari over the years?
Okay. Yep. Thanks, Nick. And first of all, I just want to commend Andy, who's been a pioneer in many ways at many levels, but most certainly in the African safari industry, of being the founder of the very first private safari lodge in West Africa, in Moli in Ghana. As Andy said, we met approximately 10, 12 years ago. And my background has been sort of 40 years in the private safari game, photographic safaris, I might add, not hunting. Photographic safaris, starting way back in 1985 at a company called Sabi Sabi. Fairly well known in the international tourism sphere are the South African private safari camps, or game lodges as they called. Mala Mala, Sabi Sabi, Londolozi were the three founding lodges, and now 30, 40 years later, there are over 130 just in the greater Kruger National Park area. The Kruger National Park is kind of like our Yellowstone, very iconic. So this sector of the industry has really taken off. And I was privileged enough to be part of the growth of the photographic safari business in South Africa. And my focus over the years, from an operations point of view, which encompassed both the tourism dimension, the conservation dimension, and very importantly, the socio-economic arm, where you have communities living adjacent to the national parks and the benefits thereof. So I've seen immense changes, but remembering South Africa in terms of our history and our background, prior to Mandela becoming president and everything becoming an equal field, although I put it in inverted commas because you can't change 350 years of imperialism, colonialism, and apartheid in 30 years. We've seen a hell of a growth in the safari industry. Now, the important thing for me over the years has been the focus on the soul of the industry. One can put up any structure for X million dollars. If the experiential dimension is not there, which is focused very much, obviously, on the wildlife in our case, the experiential dimension is the most important. These things are not facility-based products like a city hotel, or even to a degree a resort hotel. So the concept of our focus was also a philosophy of what we called high-value, low-density tourism, which meant that you have fewer people paying for a more exclusive experience in terms of the area that they go on safari. There are fewer vehicles. There's a big focus on the development of human capital in the form of safari guides and their tracker. The tracker is the guy who works with the safari guide to locate animals, etc. So that was the background, and I'm happy to say that after these 40 years, I've seen immense changes, and one of the things that has just reinforced my belief that we're dealing with experientially based products, not facility-based products, was the advent of COVID, where the whole world kind of had to recalibrate and think about how do we do things in life, and what are the true meanings in life, including when one goes away on holiday or to relax. What are we looking for? And this focus on looking at a nature-based product, or a product that is linked to nature, that experience has become more and more important. Now, it's not to say the facility, the lodge or the camp or the hotel is not important. Obviously, it is important. But the essence of the business, and including what Andy's taking on from a glamping point of view, is these lodges, camps based in areas where one is able to recalibrate and rejuvenate the soul, reconnect, call it what you like. And that is the core focus. And I think that what Andy and John and the entire team, Arvind and everybody, achieved in Ghana, being the first, was that it was the right position of a safari lodge run on a high value, low density tourism product. That is kind of in a nutshell.
Michel, I'll come back to you in a second to kind of walk us through the specifics of, what Sabi Sabi was in terms of unit types and amenities and things like that. But just to kick things off, Andy, this whole conversation started when you were essentially raving about your experience at Sabi Sabi. So could you just give us a bit of a taste of what that was like and why it impressed you so much?
Right. Well, you can think now in the position you're in, Nick, about trying to launch your own property, that if you can kind of get away from it all and go on a fun trip, that alone is worth its weight in gold, right? So I show up in South Africa in the middle of investor battles and other stuff, and I actually first met Michel in Durban for the Indaba, which is the big African travel festival, and then after that pushed off to Sabi Sabi. And what was great about Sabi Sabi is that the staff and the leadership knew that I was there to learn because I was setting up this place in Ghana, so they were kind of giving me the inside scoop as they were going along. But I also got to be a tourist, and Sabi Sabi has 4 separate lodges within this private reserve next to Kruger. So that's it. So you have also they're able to kind of hit different levels of accommodation and amenity. I was in a place called Bush Lodge, and I was moving around with a Spanish couple. And the thing that one of the first things that opened my eyes was just the fact that they choreograph it to such an extent that they want to make sure if like a whole group is out on safari, let's say there's a group of 20 in 5 different cars, they want to make sure that everyone sees a leopard on that morning drive and that they can all tell the same story. And how they do that is and Michelle will be able to tell you which languages, but every single guide, whether white African or black South African, speaks a local language, and they communicate to each other because they might limit and say they only want 2 vehicles on a leopard viewing at any given time, so you're not swarming around. And so what happens means my guide, if I'm like third in the queue, he'll like point out a tree and some kind of termite mound and really tell some really captivating stories. You don't feel like somebody's just kind of stalling you. And then they're communicating to each other in their local language to make sure they can move everyone on. It's like this seamless thing. And then they want to make sure that same guide is with you at breakfast to share stories. So they always make sure your guide is with you at all the meals. And it's just like you become woven into this process. And it blew me away, to the point where, how do you, I think the main difference between safari and glamping is there's a rhythm to safari lodges because you have this cadence of morning and evening drives that you don't have, say, at just a glamping place. But you might have a cadence of people going to the park and coming back, the concept of sundowners at the end of the day. And so I think that was one piece. The other was that, especially in South Africa, a lot of the big brands that started there were rooted in community conservation. So conservation was the core of what they were doing, and high-end accommodation was a means to get there. And that really resonated for both what we are doing in Ghana, but also this linking back to communities has always been important to me. So it was, for me, it was a fantastic experience.
Yeah, Michelle, Andy's just described the experience as almost like, stage play. Did you at times feel like you were the director, as ops director at Sabi Sabi?
I think he's hit the nail on the head. That whilst we are we operate in the greater Kruger National Park, which, just to give you an idea of the size, the Kruger National Park is about half the size of Switzerland. So it's a huge park. There's no management of the animal movements. We do not feed. We do not do anything like that. So you really are at, I won't say the mercy, but, at the behest of the movement, natural movement of the animals, etc. And obviously they're the major players of why people come to a safari lodge, because they want to see, especially the mysterious big 5, lion, leopard, elephant, rhino, and buffalo, which are the main attractions. But you've got a wide variety of wildlife. And the role of the guide, and again, coming back to what Andy said about, I won't say stage managed, but most certainly it is like a stage production without cheapening the experience. You've got all these players which are led by the wildlife, but in terms of the guide to me is the most important person within a safari camp, because that person, you're staying with them for at least 8 hours a day. It's not the owner, the director, the manager, the F&B, or the housekeeping. All are important, but the guide is the critical person, because they are the ones orchestrating the guest experience, and ensuring that guests are seeing as much as possible, as Andy mentioned, but at the same time, there is a very strict discipline about how one operates. Andy mentioned that there's a leopard sighting, and maybe his vehicle is the second one on standby to see the leopard. While they're waiting, the guide must interpret the whole or the holistic situation, not just sit there waiting like in a traffic jam at a robot um, or traffic light, I think you call them. Um, the guy's got to be able to impart knowledge, interpret the whole environment whilst focused on showing people or sharing amazing close encounters with potentially dangerous game, and ensuring that people have an amazing experience and leave with the most amazing photographs.
So we've got the vibe of Sabi Sabi and kind of how it kind of all works behind the scenes. Michelle, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about the specifics of what unit types do you have at Sabi Sabi? How many do you have? Is it for couples? Is it for families? What amenities do you have? Do you just walk us through the typical kind of experience of a guest?
Okay, as I said, going back to the philosophy of Sabi Sabi is first and foremost it's high value, low density. So you're looking at lower numbers of people paying a higher premium to have an exclusive experience. At Sabi Sabi, we have 4 different lodges. One lodge is the largest lodge is Bush Lodge. That's where Andy was staying, where you had 25 suites that sleep 2 people per suite, and then there was a family villa. So you're looking at about 56 beds in Bush Lodge. Then we've got another lodge called Earth Lodge, which has only got 13 suites, sleeping 26. So it's all doubles. And then you've got 2 smaller camps, one that sleeps 16 people and another one that sleeps 8. And these 4 lodges traverse, in other words, travel on safari on exactly the same area, which is our private property within the Kruger. But there are different rate structures for the different camps. The largest camp, Bush Lodge, would be the greatest value for money, I would say. And then your smaller camps where you have fewer people, which tend to be more exclusive in terms of numbers of people, would have a slightly higher rate. But in terms of the standard operating procedures, most certainly from a guiding point of view, I was very proud to say Sabi Sabi, we're very significantly the first safari lodge in South Africa to develop a formal training course for guides. And I started this back in 1987 because there was no previous training. And the training I'm speaking of, the importance is obviously the hard skills. You need to know about gestation periods and what trees and all the rest. But for me, the main focus was how does the guide interpret and conduct him or herself on a safari, and it's underlined by the word empathy. In other words, getting to understand very quickly, reading the guest to understand where they come from, not physically, but in terms of, was this their first safari? Have they been on safari before? Have they been to East Africa? What are the differences? And then the guide adapts their experiential delivery to each and every guest differently, which makes the guest feel very, very special. That was the one thing that Sabi Sabi was a notable first, because we had to professionalize the poor performance, if you want to put it like that, of this of the experience we were giving. But for me, it was twofold: was to most certainly broaden the role of the guide to not merely just being an encyclopedic reference point of oh, that's a jackalberry tree, Diospyros mespiliformis. That doesn't impress me much. I'd like them to talk about the medicinal uses, about the role within the environment that the vegetation plays, etc. So we were very proud to be the very first lodge to develop that in 1987. And another thing which very proud of, but it sounds, I won't say trite, but it sounds nothing special in the year 2025. But in the year 1986, in the South African experience, there were guides who all happened to be white. And there were trackers who were guys who were knowledgeable in tracking animals, etc., who happened to be black. And there was a vacancy for a guide position, and I decided to promote a guy, a black guy. And I hate to use these terms black and white, but I need to explain the situation. And I appointed this guy, William Tlatswaya, who's my age, 65 now. And there was quite an outcry and a backlash from the existing guides, who all happened to be white, in response to me appointing this guy. And 4 of them actually left. And I asked them why. And they said, well, white guys drive, black guys track. And I said, well, it might have been very avant-garde or radical in 1986. In 2025, I'm very happy to say that we have a really representative guiding industry. But by appointing a William Tlatswaya, who, by the way, all the previous young white guys who came to live their dream of being a safari guide, he was the person that taught them everything that they knew. So it made sense to give this guy a chance, and he's now a mentor like me in the industry. He and I work together in the mentoring of guides. So the important thing, the bottom line, is that at the end of the day, the product at Sabi Sabi is very much based on the experiential side and orchestrated by the guide, first and foremost. He or she is the most important person. And a guide in any tourism establishment operating in a natural area in any part of the world, it doesn't have to be all the African safari animals. In the States, you've got wildlife, but it's to talk about the history, the culture, the natural scenery, etc., etc. So bottom line, Sabi Sabi's ethos is built on expect the unexpected and be given the most amazing, highly personalized experience from your guide.
Hello, listeners. This is Sherry Halala, founder of Sage Outdoor Advisory. If you're launching an outdoor hospitality project like glamping, we can help. We offer feasibility studies and appraisals. What that means is we look at your specific market and proposed business offering and complete an in-depth analysis to make sure that your planned business will be profitable. Getting a second opinion on your proposal and forecasted financials is critical to understand before you spend years of your time and hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is particularly important if you are looking to raise money for your project from a bank or private investors. They are going to want to see this type of deep dive analysis from an independent third-party specialist in the industry. We at Sage have completed well over 250 feasibility studies and appraisals in outdoor hospitality in North America in the last 4 years. So we understand what it takes to bring a project from concept to reality. If this sounds like it could be helpful to you, you can go to our website, sageoutdooradvisory.com, and schedule a call with our team. While you're there, check out our proprietary glamping database map too. Thanks. Now back to the show.
I didn't quite realize, quite how much, obviously, as you say, you need the hard skills as a guide. You need to know about the wildlife and all of that. But it's almost like, you're the head of hospitality as well in that role. You're speaking to the guests. You are their experience. And Connor and I actually, after this episode, we're doing another one on recruiting specifically. So I'll be curious to know kind of when you speak to an applicant for a guide position, and you're really trying to figure out, okay, who's got that heart of hospitality and who hasn't. How are you, what do you look for to try and find those people that will really create that world-class guest experience?
Nick, listening to you and the fact that you're going to do something on recruitment, the most important thing is when you give somebody a chance. And I'll give you some examples, what I look for. It's a gut feel. And I remember talking to people. I wanted to see what I call, what has the person got in his or her gut, which is a sense, a feeling of their passion, their enthusiasm, and very importantly, do they have natural empathy of putting themselves in the shoes of a guest or understanding what somebody else's needs or expectations are, and can they provide it? I was not interested in the hard skills of how many trees they could trot out with a common name and a botanical name and gestation period and these male antelope have horns and balls and the females don't. And because if somebody's got empathy and they've got it in the gut, they will learn the hard skills. I'm talking in terms of a safari guide, obviously. Obviously, if I needed brain surgery, I'm not going to look for somebody who's got empathy. I want to know somebody who's got hard skills. But quite honestly, in the guiding industry, it wasn't. It wasn't. I was not impressed by somebody who had a bachelor's or a master's, an honors or a doctorate in botany or zoology. If they did not have that empathy or that feeling for humanity or humans, I would not employ them because they would be useless as a guide.
That was great. Thank you, Michelle. And Andy, you've obviously had your fair share of experience hiring, obviously, at Zena. Would you agree with that perspective? Anything to add on that?
No, absolutely. A couple of thoughts came to mind. One that you guys will find interesting. So one of my favorite cases in business school was called Managing Service Ops. So we did a case on Commerce Bank, which was in the U.S. bought by TD Bank. But Commerce Bank had the highest customer service rating in any bank in the U.S. And we kind of drilled into what the secret sauce was. And their secret sauce was they only hired people who smiled at a resting state in interviews. Like that was literally what made. And so that's a really interesting anecdote about you want to find high, especially in the industry we're in, high energy people. But I've had a lot of success with internship programs. I created a master's level internship program at the World Wildlife Fund. And there's still some people from that program working there today. And so the great thing about internship programs, whether at the high school or undergrad level, is that you get to test people out in a real world situation before you hire them. Now, it's a lot more effort to most people who are not used to hiring people, but it actually pays for itself. I think I might have told Connor, I actually tied with Amazon this past summer as having hired the most Georgetown MBA interns this summer, even though mine were all unpaid. I just took them out to lunch in the mountains. But these guys did amazing work for us. And as long as you kind of have that mindset, so I'd say internship programs. The challenge we had at Zena was this, like, how are you going to open the highest rated property ever built in northern Ghana where people had never been to a high-end hotel, let alone work for one? So we ended up partnering with this Indian management team, which is where I met Arvind, who was going to run ops for Sojourner. And we brought in a chef, F&B manager, and Arvind as a director of ops to kind of as a core. And then we hired about 2 or 3 department heads from core positions in the capital of Ghana, Accra. And then we hired all freshers because one of Arvind's main themes was you actually want to hire people with almost no hospitality experience because you don't want them to bring all the bad habits they get, but you have to have this core management team around that. And so I think if I think of one of the stories of Zena I'm the most proud of is that we started off with me plus 5 Indians to launch that property. And as of 6 months ago, Zena is finally 100% Ghanaian run. So we promoted a guy who was leading our front office to be the manager. So it's, the board is there. And so that's, it takes time. That was a 10-year trajectory, but I like building businesses where I don't have to be involved on a day-to-day basis forever. So,
That's incredible.
yeah. And so we're actually taking this. So part of why I forced Dionis to let me bring Arvind back is because we're basically going to get the band back together and do the same thing. So I've identified the Greene County Technical Center, which is a high school program right across the road from us. UVA's is down the road. James Madison has a hospitality program. So once I know we have kind of an opening timeline, I'm going to start working with professors and start building that program. And my dream for Sojourner is we have a conversation. You guys hopefully are still doing this podcast 10 years or you've passed it on to someone.
10 years?
Telling a story of like, there's a kid from that tech program who might never thought of hospitality as a career, and our training program, is going to be designed in such a way that you could go work for any hospitality institution in the world, and that kid either goes on to be like a Sojourner GM or doing something. That's kind of, for me, we want to make money for investors and all that stuff, but it's really, what I found I'm most proud of is kind of what individual staff have done and kind of what it's done for their lives, really.
I mean, I presume it's a whole lot more rewarding as well, bringing someone in when they're young and, nurturing them and working them, seeing them improve and step up and take more responsibility. And presumably that kind of creates a culture kind of organically, I suppose, as well.
Yeah. Well, and I want to build on what's cool about this Willie story that, one, I remember Michelle first telling me the story of Willie and him forcing to train the first black tour guide in post-apartheid South Africa. What was cool about that is we're in Durban, he tells me this story, and then that evening, all the old Sabi Sabi boys are getting together for drinks, and Willie is there. So I get to meet him and have a beer with him. And so that was such an awesome experience. But what also really struck me, and this is going to be important for you for Poshnik, is I was like, wow. I remember at that point in 2014, it's like, one day, 10 years from now, all the old Zena boys are going to get together. And the funny thing is, I'll probably go back to Ghana over the summer, and we're now at the stage where all the old Zena boys can get together and have drinks. So one day they'll be like, the old Sabi Sabi, Sojourner Greene County boys, and you'll get together with, and boys and girls. We don't want to be sexist here, but this idea of creating this family and kind of, what you all went through, and that startup period is kind of a fundamentally bonding thing. It's just, everything is going every which way, and it just bonds everyone together.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly kind of you with the hardships and all the shit you have to go through, like it
Yeah.
absolutely does bond you together. And
I remember the capital raise is the easy part. Once you get going, it's going to real stuff.
Don't make me even more depressed, Andy.
That's all right. I want you to go in eyes wide open, Nick. It's like it's just jumping from one problem to the next. It's like they're not easier or harder. They're just different sets of problems.
Actually, that's a point I've been thinking about. Obviously, I as I've said, it's a common theme speaking to so many people about how it is just difficult getting these businesses off the ground and then running them. And I know it's going to be hard going into it, and I know we're just going to go from one challenge to another, as every business does. But still, kind of, there's whether it's naive or blind optimism or whatever. It's like, oh, once we get to this stage, it'll be fine, and then you run into another challenge. It's like, oh, once we get to that stage, we'll be fine. Do you kind of need that just kind of blind belief that everything's going to be all right to kind of keep pushing through?
If you don't have relentless optimism, you're screwed before you start. So yes, you just got to go in. And the thing is, I always describe it as I had multiple opportunities to test my commitment to the vision. Right? Pre-launch capital raise, the world is throwing bombs at you to get you to walk away, and the easier option is always to walk away. But then and even I, there's been parts where Sojourner was harder than I thought it was, but at least I've had the experience of all those times I was going to walk away from Zaina and didn't, and then it led to something amazing that I'm proud of. So that's kind of what's kept me in the game, because you're raising money for 5 years and telling stories to people like, well, have you? I got an email today from someone like, have you guys opened yet? I was like, no, man, we're so far from opening, but we will. And here's what we're doing. It's gonna be great. Stick with me.
I love the reframing of they're not challenges or problems. They're just opportunities to check your commitment to the vision.
No, it has to be, because you can't, but every time you fail is an opportunity to learn and adjust. If you don't mind, I'll tell you one quick story. So one big dumb move we made, Nick, and this is something so Zaina was 25 rooms. We had opened kind of December 2015. Easter is the biggest season, and we were realizing we were 100% booked for Easter, but we only had 12 rooms. And so instead of, say, training our team to get ready for the volume, we rushed to open the last 13 rooms. We had 25, and it was like a total epic disaster. Like everything, all the wheels fell off the bus. And it was terrible. In hindsight, we should have focused on making sure our team was ready at the volume of 100% occupancy of 13 rooms rather than trying to rush and put all your money into opening those rooms. But I had this amazing marketing manager, and we basically, for example, like we left a woman with a special needs kid in the hot sun for 2 hours, or the car was late and one of my drivers actually lied and said there was a flat tire, even though it was clearly there was no flat tires. But we actually went and visited personally, like I think 12 different families in the Accra, and actually offered them all fam stays. So we turned like what would have been an epic disaster into a real win, and kind of showing people. But it was you're gonna have a lot of those stories once you guys get going. But it's what makes it fun, right? We could be doing boring jobs if we wanted to.
Sometimes I do wonder what it would be like to have a 9 to 5 and just chill and switch off at 5 o'clock on a Friday. But no, it's the highs are great, right? And so yeah, it's what we sign up for, and we love it. Michel, I presume you've had some your fair share of war stories and things go wrong while you're operating these locations.
Yeah, look, I said one of the things is that one's got to expect the unexpected, and Andy was mentioning about the pre-opening at Zaina, where I think it was incredible when I was up there, and the focus. And you've got to expect the unexpected, because things happen. SH1T happens, and but in terms of the satisfaction that we get involved in tourism, be it nature-based tourism, ecotourism, what you want to call it. Is that the majority of the time, in terms of the response that you get from your customers, from your guests, overwhelms the war stories, as you call them. I mean, they're humorous to mention, and I look forward to. And Andy says the Zaina Old Boys. I hope I qualify, Andy, not in terms of the years that I spent there with you, but in terms of that I'm 64. I'd like to come back. But I think it's an amazing camaraderie when people are involved in the development of a product, and they own the product, because that was what struck me when I was at Zayna. As I said, I look at what people have got in their gut, and I must say the cross section of people that I met at Zayna all had it, and this willingness and this drive to provide a most amazing experience. And of course, the things would go wrong, that a vehicle breaks down, or you get bitten by tsetse fly, or possibly food is served cold for one course. But the overwhelming experience will always override that, and you can, won't say get away from a lot, but the attitude of your staff is critical. Yeah, I echo what Andy says. He said one thing earlier to all of us, said, we could be doing another job. I mean, Andy, you could have got a call from DJT to become his Secretary of Tourism. Think about that.
One thing I'm curious about is, obviously, we use the term glamping. Obviously, there's different terminology in Africa, but that balance of creating a luxury experience but respecting nature and conserving nature. Was there anything specific that you did, Michel, and you did after Andy at Zayna, that kind of where you had to strike a balance between creating luxury in a natural world? Did they ever kind of come up against each other at all?
It's an interesting thing, the definition of luxury, even back in the 80s and early 90s, working at Sabi Sabi and these high profile luxury lodges, luxury in terms of the material based product. And, I coined a phrase which was very much relevant to South Africa during apartheid. I warned the private lodges. I said, we've got to be careful not to become an island of opulence, to be seen as an island of opulence in a sea of poverty, which is quite a radical view, but it was relevant at the time in South Africa. And then leading on to that thing about what is the definition of luxury. And very soon after, a couple of years later, we bought Sabi Sabi. We bought another piece of property which had a camp on it with no electricity. And we were debating with the owners of the company. They were debating about, this is 1993, by the way, and they said, what are we going to do with this camp? Our two other lodges are fully electrified, air conditioned, everything. I said, you know what? I believe that possibly one of the dimensions of future definition of luxury is less is more. And actually, let's not electrify it, which they didn't do. Sabi didn't do, but eventually they did succumb to the marketplace that they operate in, and they electrified it. But I believe that definition of luxury can also be a quality of life experience. And at present, Nick and Connor and Andy knows a bit, I'm involved in a very small tented camp, also in the Greater Kruger. We're completely off the grid, and we have no Wi-Fi, which is a bastard when you're running the business. But from a guest point of view, I say to them, our philosophy, and we're the only camp in the Greater Kruger that does not have Wi-Fi, and our rate structure is much lower than everybody else's. But I often say to guests, guys, again, with our experience of through COVID, where we have to recalibrate, one of the things I'm proud of is that I don't have Wi-Fi. And for 2 or 3 days in that camp, people can live without Wi-Fi. I've got a system in place. If there's an emergency, or if people want to get, I can go and have access to Wi-Fi at a camp close by. But this definition of luxury, Nick, is something which can be redefined or defined in different ways. And Sojourner and any natural experience, it doesn't mean to say you've got to go basic and you've got to give your guests a spade to go and dig for a toilet. I'm not saying that. There are those places. What I'm saying is that luxury can be defined by many things. And most certainly the experience over the last 4 or 5 years, I believe that less is more. And there's a rate. People pay a higher rate for that because everybody has got everything at home at a flick of a switch. So by allowing them to go and have an experience in a natural surrounding is something which is a luxury, which is not necessarily dependent on every material means.
Awesome. Andy?
Yeah, sure. So I think what's interesting is when my philosophy on sustainability is that it's a journey, not a destination. And so one of the things with Zana especially is I never really described it as an eco lodge because I'd been working at the World Wildlife Fund for 6 years before that all over the world. And a German, a UK person, and an American's definition of sustainability is vastly different. And so many people would have looked at Zana as an eco-friendly property, but I also used an insane amount of concrete, and we're running 32 air conditioners on a daily basis. And there's a lot of Germans that would have told me there's no way that's an eco lodge. And so what we did is we talked about, look, we've created the largest thatch roof structure in northern Ghana. The mud kind of designs you see on the pictures of Zana, that's in the style of the Larabanga Mosque, which is the oldest mosque in West Africa, which is right outside the park. And the women from that community came and did all of that. So it's really kind of showing that you can combine local culture with luxury. We had a completely solar-powered water system from solar pumps all the way to solar heaters. So we would tell those stories. We limited single-use plastics by having an RO reverse osmosis machine, and we would serve water, those kind of things. And so, and I think for me, it's not just luxury and environment. It's also how do you weave the community in there, because the community engagement for me is kind of core to everything we do. When I turn around to Sojourner, I mean, the issue that I struggle with now is, yes, we want to be environmentally friendly, but I'm also putting in 144 units on a piece of land, right? So there is going to be some level of impact, and the question is, how do you minimize that when you think about your energy use, your water use, putting things on raised decks to limit land disturbance, things like that. I mean, our base point there is the alternative would have been a housing development, which would have clear cut the land, things like that. So it's always a challenge, but I would never describe any of my properties as the most whatever. But what I want to be able to talk about is, here's where we are in our sustainability journey. Here's what we're working towards, and what I want to do with Sojourner is create a fairly transparent system where we report on an annual basis on where we are on these different sustainability metrics.
Connor, I'm interested in your take on the on what Michelle was saying as well about the phone off or Wi-Fi off kind of approach to luxury, because I think you were thinking of doing that when you almost had a site just when COVID hit. That was going to be your approach, wasn't it?
Yes, and it depends on the property, but and the experience you're trying to create. But I think if you're really trying to create an impactful, memorable experience with a guest that's going to stick with them, I think one of the easiest, most low-hanging fruit ways to do that in this day and age is to take away their Wi-Fi and to even potentially take away their phones. And it forces you to slow down and connect with the people around you, or connect with yourself, or observe in a way that is truly so rare. So I'm a huge believer in that, and people might have a problem with it, but I think when they get to the end of the trip, it's gonna be so different from their day to day for that very reason, and they'll get a lot more out of the experience by being present.
It's interesting because we debated that, and I get where you're coming from, and I can see how in certain properties that would work. One of the debates we had, so I had this one of my main investors in Ghana was this elder Dutch couple who had traveled kind of the highest end lodges all over the world. So they wanted no Wi-Fi, no TVs. And the challenge is, if you looked at what my typical market could be for Zana, I could have some high-end nature travelers, but I could also have a Lebanese family with a bunch of kids. I could have a hard-charging South African miner who just wanted to drink. And you never really knew what was going on. So we took an opposite approach to say even something like what Under Canvas does. And we said, look, I'm going to have Wi-Fi. If you want to use it, you can use it. If you don't, you don't. We actually had satellite TV in every room in Zana, but we actually designed this custom Malian cabinet. So if you don't want to watch TV, you've got this really cool Malian cabinet, and if you do, it's there. And when we think about Sojourner, because we're trying to move beyond just vacation travelers to somebody who's working from home, I think we described ourselves more like the nature version of an extended stay hotel, because we'll have kitchenettes. So if someone wants to work there long term, if you want to write a novel at Sojourner and you need Wi-Fi to do it, I want you to be able to do that. There are trade-offs, as well, but I guess we're kind of more focused on removing the friction that people feel in an outdoor stay. But I could see, there's different camps on kind of how that plays out.
The other thing is, if you put on your marketing hat, and I personally, I would want people taking pictures of the site and putting on their Instagram stories, and there's always that there can be that clash between marketing and guest experience. It's like, we've had Derry Green on, who designs the units around what's going to work best on an Instagram reel. Like, that's taking it to an extreme kind of end, but there is that balance, and I think there's so many ways to do it. And as you say, Andy, you had satellite TVs at Zana. That's not something that you really see very much at all in the US industry, but in the UK industry, loads of glamping pods have TVs in, and it's just different ways of doing it. I was actually, a site that I was working on before kind of Posh kicked off was potentially going to have like TVs, but not necessarily satellite TVs, but for like movie nights in the unit, particularly in the winter. I think that could be a cozy thing, obviously. But some people would say, it's a million miles away from the natural experience you're supposed to have. So I think, there's many ways to skin a cat, and it's interesting having those different kind of definitions of luxury and guest experience.
Right. And I think for Jonas and I, look, we're going to take as much guest feedback. So if we find that something we did was a wrong choice, we'll adjust and improve as we go, right? And see kind of things how it plays out.
Yeah, and you brought up one really big thing, and that is if you are going to go the no Wi-Fi and the no phones route, that does come with some serious drawbacks. Probably the biggest one, if you're not having Wi-Fi, is it could hurt your midweek occupancy. So it really depends, which is the most difficult thing to get. So it really depends on like your location and the customer experience, because I have considered a lot of properties where you would want Wi-Fi, and having a work remote station in the unit is a really important part. So people could be booking a whole week instead of just the weekend. And then, Nick, you also bring up a good point about not having your phones to take pictures. So it'd be interesting to try to find a workaround to that.
Well, you could have, Polaroid
or upload hour, right?
Yeah. I think that feels dystopian almost. Upload hour, but I think what I would say is if you're gonna go no Wi-Fi and take away what almost strip back to create that luxury, is I think you've just got to go the whole hog and go all in, rather than kind of just be a generic glamping site and hey, we don't have Wi-Fi. I don't think that would necessarily work. I think the best way to do it would be kind of your site was going to be almost like a retreat kind of thing, where it's all about disconnecting. That was the USP really, and obviously the no phone, no Wi-Fi kind of thing really fits into that, and it's kind of the lead part of that. So I think if you're going to go all in, it makes sense. Whereas if you're going to do half measures out, I would suggest it's probably not worth doing.
When if you think about where Michel is, I mean, if I was at Michel's place tonight, I wouldn't want to have Wi-Fi because I just want to have a beer and listen to all of Michel's stories and look at the stars, right? So I think the environment and the setting really dictates kind of the needs as well.
And I do think I want to bring up the last 10 years, social media has been such a powerful tool, particularly for our industry, and I still recommend that everyone taps into it. But I do think, like, if you look to the next 10 years, is social media going to play the same role? And maybe it will, but I also think there is a point where there's just like, it's so overdone, and there's almost like an inflation of content on social media. And I wonder if, 5-10 years from now, it will be as powerful. And I think, like, there's this thing in Bend called the Dawn Dance Party, and they send out a text 24 hours before the event, and it only says a location and a time. And you just show up, and they have free coffee and music and a DJ, and it runs from 7 a.m. to like 8 a.m. and it's an hour, and it's like 500 people every time. You don't have to pay for it. It's just a free thing, but it shows how powerful something is when it's like, hey, this is off the grid. It's almost speakeasy style. Like, our marketing is that we have no marketing. Journey Vitae, the program that I run as well, it was a really distinct choice not to have social media, because that kind of was counterintuitive to like our mission of trying to get people to live more intentional lives. So, and that ended up never being a problem for us because it was all word of mouth, and we just use referrals only. So it is interesting, like, can you, what does the future look like in that space? How powerful is word of mouth if you totally move away from those traditional tactics?
Right. It's funny when you think we launched Zaina 10 years ago, Facebook was the main thing and Instagram was the new thing in town. There wasn't Reels yet. There was no TikTok, and if we hosted this reality TV contest actually at the property, and all the people who were there were on Instagram because they were all younger, right? And I wasn't on Instagram. I had like 10, it pulled us on Instagram. We now have 24,000 followers for Zaina there. But we're not on TikTok, and we probably should be, right? And I've listened to episodes for you guys with that guy at the garden place in the UK. I mean, his TikTok focus is insane. But you're right. So what does that look like 10 years ago? 10 years from now with AI, and what does that do?
Yeah, and it's new generations as well, right? Facebook 10, 15 years ago was cool. Now it's
Yeah.
just not.
Yeah.
But you just won't catch a 21-year-old
It's
on
like my and
Facebook now.
Michelle's generation.
Yeah, sorry, Andy. It is
Sorry.
right. It's like
All
Facebook is
good.
now kind
I
of.
was user number 38,000, so I was actually that low on Facebook, if you can believe that. So.
And then Instagram is the millennial platform, TikTok's the Gen Z platform, and it just constantly changes. And I do think social media in whatever format it is in 10 years will continue to be important for these experiences, but you can't just stick to one approach unless maybe you're sticking to the boomer generation, in which case rinse Facebook all your life. And I'm not calling you a boomer, Andy.
It's all right. I'm right on the end.
It's just I think that the best operators just continually evolve as the landscape changes. So it is interesting. I'm getting more and more depressed about the way the world's going and stuff like that. So we'll just have to we'll have to see what happens with AI and all that. But back onto more cheerful stuff. Andy, what have you taken from your experience at Zena, your experience at Sabi Sabi, your work with Michel? How are you taking that into Sojourner, into the guest experience?
Yeah, I'll start with Michel first. I think some of my special memories with Michel were the time he was with us at the lodge in Ghana, and I think I told you guys the story that I had never seen buffalo in the park before. Right? Now you can see them a lot more easier, but at the time it was difficult. And we did the graduation ceremony. What we did is we trained our guides, but we also trained the Mole National Park guides who were working alongside our guys as well. So we had the park manager in, and we did a graduation ceremony. And then Michel and I went on a celebration drive, and it was literally in the middle of that drive that I saw buffalo in the park for the first time. So it was like this magical event. And so, like I said, I tried to get Michel in as the GM at Zena at one point when we had lost a manager. Didn't work for board politics, but if there was a way I could bring him to the U.S. and have him tell stories around the campfire at Sojourner, I would as well. I think that the main thing I take forward, and this is something I kind of had to impress on Dionys from day one, is that there's just something magic about the vibe of a safari lodge, even when you're out under the stars. And so, and I still feel like even though there are tented properties in the U.S., nobody's really recreated that feel. So that's really what we're trying to do, is you're trying to capture the magic of an African safari lodge, but bring it to the U.S. market. Obviously, the focus is not on wildlife viewing, but it's about the stay and this outdoor thing. That's why tents were so important to me. But it's also why hiring people from the local areas is a really big driver, because I think that made a big difference at Zena. I would like to say that we created a magical HR system that gave us these high ratings on TripAdvisor, but I think part of what we discovered accidentally is you were hiring people who had grown up in this park their whole lives. Their dad had been park rangers, and suddenly somebody was building something in their community. So there was this embedded level of pride that you can't duplicate. And it's something I'm going to try and, we were required to hire at least 50% local staff there. I think we ended up with 75. So that's where I've even told, for Sojourner, we'll hire in the local county first, then kind of go a little bit out and try and get that concentration. But I think the main takeaway is you guys talk so much on this podcast about the guest experience being so important. I think part of that is the soul of the place, as Michel said. And so for me, everything on the property, to the extent you can, should have a story behind it. Whether it's the local product and where it came from, the story of the person behind the desk. There should be a lot of intentionality about everything you can, because it just weaves people in. And I think the goal was for Zena was, by the time people left us, they should feel like they're leaving old friends behind. Like that's really the goal, is that you've been touched in such a way. Now, the challenge for me would be, how do I do that in a 144 unit property relative to a 25 unit property? But how do we create, so that's really going to be my focus, and we'll learn as we go.
What have you come up with so far as any trying to create that safari experience magic in the outdoors? How does that, how have you found ways to translate that?
So one of the coolest things that safari lodges do is they have this surprise and delight dinners. And so it's a bit different when you're on a safari. So what they'll do is, imagine it's like you've had sundown or somewhere, you're on a night drive, it's starting to get dark, and literally what will happen is a guide will say, hey, there's a crocodile up a tree somewhere, and all the safari vehicles will rush off, and then you show up in this little clearing, and there's a lantern-lit dinner for everybody at the lodge. And all it is a buffet dinner with some meat and stuff, and it's like probably the most basic food, but the experience is so magical. And we did a couple of those at Zena as well, and you could set up a really cool lantern-lit dinner on a property that literally could be right next to the water heater in a place during the day that's a nothing burger of a site. But at night, because of the darkness, you can create this magic. So one of the things that Dionys and I felt was important was we want to have some level of guests every day to be able to book like the surprise and delight experience. Now you have to staff around that, but imagine like a special romantic dinner, but it's somewhere on the property. creating those kind of special experiences. I think also, as much as possible, getting people out into the communities and experiences, or bringing service providers from the area. I mean, that's where we're going to try and do it. I think the intimacy piece will be an interesting one. I think of Sojourner on a 25% occupancy. Saturday in December is going to be way different than like 100% occupancy day in July, right? That's a whole different ballgame.
No, I love that idea of, you're almost systemizing the surprise and delight, right? And it's something that I thought, I'm a little bit more removed from the actual guest experience from our sites at Posh, just because of the nature of our model. We put a lot of trust in the people we partner with. But if I was to be an operator, I think, I'd try and make sure that, every guest has at least one surprise and delight, whether it is that kind of surprise dinner or what, it could be anything. Yeah. And then
sometimes it could be the gift that you leave on the bed at the end of like the day, special gifts. One thing that Arvin brought from, I think it was Alila, was this idea of a guest preference menu. So you have guests that are coming back. You need a systematized way to capture kind of what their preferences were. So by the time they come back the next time, maybe they made a special request. And you'd be surprised just remembering one little detail, and it might be in your customer management system. There's so many different ways and nooks. I think the entry experience also, Connor, becomes really important. If you really find a way to kind of choreograph the entry experience, then they're kind of more open to the rest of the time there.
And I remember we've talked about it on the podcast actually. The book Unreasonable Hospitality, about a guy who ran a kind of Michelin style restaurant in New York, and kind of a lot of those surprise and delights started just from they hide those people that Michel was talking about, that just have that instinct for hospitality and that empathy. And the staff member would just do something on the fly, and it would amaze the guests. And then if there was a way to kind of work it into the system and make it more of a regular thing, they do it. And I think that combination of that kind of instinctive hospitality, coupled with the kind of the ability to make it a regular thing, or tweak it slightly to become a regular thing. The guests don't know it's a regular thing, but you just pull it out again and again. I think that's a pretty good recipe.
Well, one of the things that happened, so during the process of starting Zan, I was initially like the CEO of this guy that was going to do multiple properties across West Africa. Then investor battles happened, and I actually had to kind of take a demotion and become the Safari Lodge manager for 2 years at Zan. And in the time, in 2016, it felt like I was being banished to Siberia. In hindsight, it was the coolest 2 years of my life, right? I got to be this, I actually got to dive into the operations, manage the food procurement, the whole show, which is really helping me for Sojourner now. But my favorite moments there is, because then you have Andy, the founder, owner, and manager there for guests. And for that was just a magic experience. So on Saturdays, we would just do a PowerPoint on the story of Sojourner, and I would show up there and walk all the guests through after dinner in front of a fire, drinking a beer, and just telling stories. And I wish I could, if that was all I could ever do, like that was the most fun I've ever had, So I'm looking forward to telling stories about Sojourner over a beer one day, a couple of years from now.
Awesome. Michel, I think we'd like to finish off with you. A lot of our audience are either prospective or existing operators, generally in the US, but almost exclusively in North America. Now, we typically don't have the advantage of having elephants and cheetahs and all sorts on our doorstep, but we can apply principles of hospitality as you've discussed. So, is there one particular piece of advice you'd give, Michel, to a prospective glamping operator in the US? That would allow them to create a world-class guest experience?
Thanks very much, Nick, Connor, and Andy for involving me, number one, in this. It's been very enlightening and wonderful to see all the various initiatives that you guys are involved in or getting involved in. For me, the bottom line is, yes, we're very fortunate in Africa because we've got amazing wildlife. But, the bottom line for any visitor, tourist, or a guest wanting to go somewhere, and what are we trying to provide for them in terms to exceed their needs and expectations? As I said, Africa, we've got the wildlife. I think that every place around the world has a certain special attraction, or can give a wow experience, be it the Michelin star restaurant in New York through to the moonrise in the Midwest. And I think that for me, the bottom line is the focus on any development. The material development is the easiest side of things. It's the development of the soul of the place, which very much comes from the staff, the human capital, and the aspect of storytelling. I would say that in a guest experience, wherever they are, the aspect of bringing in an element of storytelling around a fire or at a meal or something. Storytelling is a lost art, and it's coming back. And I'm involved in various platforms from the US through to Bosnia, Herzegovina, and places where guys are focusing on the role of storytelling coming back as a means to enhance the experience of people who are traveling away from home. So the soul of the place through human capital, the uniqueness of utilizing the environment within which your lodge or your camp, your hotel is based, is maximizing the surroundings, and then not forgetting the storytelling. But bottom line, the staff are the soul of a place.
It's interesting, the idea of, an African eco lodge that's focused on game and wildlife, and the choreography or fitting into the flow of the natural rhythm of those natural attractions, and how can that be applied to the US. And also, what Michel touched on as far as the guest connection with a guide who's with them throughout their entire stay, and building that relationship, and like that guide connecting with the guest being a really core part of the experience, I think is something that's largely overlooked in the US and in our sector. And I do wonder if there's a way to bring that in to what we do in the States. And, some things that came to mind. And I'd be curious, Nick, if you had any ideas, like, is there a way in the US where you can connect guests so closely with the staff that's almost like a guide type experience? And I can see that with outdoor adventure, if you're taking people on rafting or on hikes or horseback rides or whatever, or maybe if there's like a wellness component to it and you're incorporating, saunas and cold plunge, and there's like storytelling and history and a journey going into that. But yeah, I'd be curious if you guys had any thoughts on that.
I do know. I think it's Clairquot in on Vancouver Island. They charge $2,000 a night and plus. So that's probably your answer. They do have. I think you can have a personal guide, and I was looking into similar kind of super high end resorts like that. And those kind of resorts, you can have basically a butler, personal guide, whatever you want to call it. Whether or not it could work in a $400 a night place, I don't know. I've not looked too deeply into it, but Andy, I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
Well, I can only think of the beginning of the anchor for Sojourners. So there's a woman who supported us during our, as we talked about in the last podcast, our very tumultuous approval process. And we've already identified that we're going to bring her on once we start. She's going to be kind of the number 2 to Arvin, just doing what needs to be done. But she is so proud of her community. So I already know she's going to be the anchor, what begins to be that connection. Because if she's going to be anywhere, I could have her in the restaurant, I could have her at guest services, wherever. She's going to exude that energy and bring people around. So I think that, to Michel's point, with staff being kind of the soul of the place, you kind of want to anchor around those kind of people who just almost just emit energy and enthusiasm for the place. And I think that's where you can start to get to it. But I think you're right. Without actually having a guide that's with people, I think you need to have kind of staff in that mindset that they're, you're a facilitator. No matter what department you're in, you're trying to make whoever's in your care during that given time, make sure they have the best possible experience, and help them understand and kind of get to know the community during that short time that they're there.
Well, I think that's a great place to finish off. So thank you again, Andy. I'm sure we'll have you on a third time. There's so many great stories in your background. So we'd love to have you on again, Michel. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing your stories and your time with us. We'll put all the links to Zaina and Sabi Sabi in the description. So if anyone wants to check them out, take a look. We'll also put Andy's previous episode in the description as well for people who do want to go back and listen. It really is a great insight, particularly into kind of permitting large projects and the way you have to approach it with locals. And there's some horror stories in there, as there always are with permitting. So do go and check that out. But until well, I was going to say next week. It's every 2 weeks now. But until a fortnight's time, that'll be it for now. But thank you guys for coming on, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
What an absolute pleasure. Thank you, guys.